Good morning. My name is Evie DeGravel. I am with the Department of Commerce. I'm proud to serve as the moderator for this session today. Before I introduce our speakers, please add any questions you have during the presentation to the Whova app. I'll monitor those questions and we can share those questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please join me in welcoming our speakers today. We have Stacy Dim for the ARC of Washington State. Sheng Fang, he is with the Washington State Developmental Disabilities Administration. Nathan Lichti, I can't say your name, sorry Nate. He's with the Department of Commerce. And Marc is with Parkview Services. Please join me in welcoming them today. And Stacy, you're up. You need your PowerPoint. That'd be good.
Yeah. Hey everybody, we had some tech complications. So we put everything on one drive so that we'll be able to all coordinate. There we go. So thanks everybody for coming. I'm super excited to be at the Washington Housing Conference. Contrary to what my slide says, I know I'm in Washington, not Oregon. So many apologies, don't take offense. We were just there last week doing this, and I changed everything but that apparently. But it really is meant for you. So I'm Stacy Dim. I'm the Executive Director at the ARC of Washington State. I'm hoping that many of you are familiar with the ARC. We've been around since 1936 in Washington State, advocating for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm also a sibling, so I come to the work with a family perspective, and I'm really excited to have this many people interested in how developmental disabilities intersects with housing issues in our state. We are generally, as the state organization, an advocacy organization, so I work a lot on legislative policy, trying to change the system so that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are not unnecessarily institutionalized. Our state has a very long history of institutionalizing people with developmental disabilities from early childhood on, and we still struggle with that. And a lot of the barrier to ensuring that people with developmental disabilities can live in the community among all of us and thrive, at this point, one of the biggest barriers is appropriate housing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Look at that. So usually when I talk about the topic of around housing for developmental disabilities, I make sure that policymakers and legislators understand it takes these three things to work together. There has to be some synergy between the brick and mortar housing, between supports and services, which often come from our State Developmental Disabilities Administration, and you'll hear from Sheng Fang here pretty soon. The great thing about our folks is they often come into the housing world with services to support them. So if everything's going well, that's an integral part. And then, of course, there's the caregiver workforce. And I'm sure you've all heard in every profession right now, we're struggling with the workforce. In developmental disabilities in particular, we're really struggling to make sure that we have an adequately trained and paid workforce to provide those services within the context of community-based housing. So just a little bit of background information, and that's kind of my role today, is to orient you to developmental disabilities, and then you'll hear a lot more about housing projects as our speakers go along. In our state, by census, it's expected that we would have about 170,000 people with developmental disabilities. Now, I know a lot of you may not understand the distinction between people with disabilities and this very specific group of people with developmental disabilities. But you can anticipate that someone with developmental disabilities got their disability, a very significant disability that affects them in most areas of their life functioning as a child before 18. So that's what the developmental part talks about in their developmental years. It was not acquired later through a traumatic brain injury or an accident. A lot of people with developmental disabilities have an identified genetic syndrome. They've been receiving services since they were children, so those should be flags for those of you that are working with folks out in the community. Our Developmental Disabilities Administration only identifies right now about 50,000 of those individuals. So you can see people with developmental disabilities are really under-identified within a support system that is meant to be lifelong for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about on another day. People with developmental disabilities, in terms of housing, I pulled out a couple of statistics that are important. 30 to 40% of people with developmental disabilities have a co-occurring mental health disability. And so some of our folks are challenged. They need communication support, sensory support. Without those things, they tend to have high behavior support needs. Right now in our programs under developmental disabilities, crisis kind of drives that system, like a lot of our social service systems. So the folks that are getting services from DDA tend to be folks with higher support needs right now. There are a lot of folks with developmental disabilities, however, who just want to live in the community. You could think of probably your local bagger at the grocery store with Down syndrome, someone in the community that you see working. They are individuals who don't want to live with their families their whole life. And right now, our system is such that people with developmental disabilities live with their families the majority of their lifetime. Families are the long-term care support system for people with developmental disabilities in our state. And when the family structure cannot continue to support that individual, that's when folks go into crisis, because our state right now doesn't have a great way for people to plan for when that's no longer the case. So in my job, for example, I often hear monthly, regularly, from 70, 80, and 90-year-old moms and dads who are still caring for their son or daughter with developmental disabilities. And they may also be caring for their spouse who's aging, or they've just discovered that they have cancer. We saw a lot of crisis during COVID when one or both older parents passed away from COVID suddenly, and there was no plan for that individual to go with other family or to find other support services. So about 15% of people with developmental disabilities often have to live alone because they have such high behavior support needs. They have a hard time living with other people. They need a very supportive environment that often makes it hard to live with other people. And we have about 30% of people with developmental disabilities that demonstrate hoarding behavior. And so that makes them sometimes challenging to live in a large communal setting, and they have to have a lot of support in order for them to live successfully. I mentioned that aging issue. We all know there's a lot of baby boomers right now who are going to age out, and we know that there's going to be a much higher demand year by year to house and support people with developmental disabilities. We know that about half of that 50,000 I described that are identified by DDA are children, so you could assume that the rest are adults, and they are going to need housing. The Cooney Foundation helped us really a lot. I don't know how many of you know about the Cooney Foundation, but they started a wonderful study around developmental disabilities and housing that Washington kind of stood on the shoulders of and contracted for just Washington State. And through that study, Eco Northwest helped us understand that we have at least 37,000 people with developmental disabilities that will need housing in the near future. Right now, through the Housing Trust Fund, we have a DD set aside, and that helps us build scattered site housing. That's mostly single-family homes, duplexes, and triplexes. That model allows for probably a little more customization of an environment, more supportive space for staff who are going to care for someone, staff parking, noise mitigation, durable materials. They're a little more expensive to build, but they're much more customizable in terms of a model. We only right now have 1,382 of those units built through the DD set aside. So you can imagine that 37,000 people who need housing are going to have a hard time, one bedroom at a time, trying to get their needs met. And as you can see, compared to the actual population and what DDA has identified, we're still going to be really challenged. So as I mentioned, the reality is our housing tends to be more expensive. Some people with developmental disabilities can live in low-income housing. The kicker is that majority of people with developmental disabilities, adults, live on SSI. That's a poverty-based program That means they get on average in Washington about $991 a month to live on. So at $300 a month, they're rent burdened. That's why a lot of people have to group together in order to maintain a living situation, and why it's really hard to house someone who may have higher support needs. We know that in order to get these projects put together for more scattered site housing, it's very hard in a loan structure to raise the rent in order to meet the needs for maintenance and operations. And so it's really hard for nonprofits who want to specialize in this housing to do this on their own. We know that we need more developers that are doing this work, and we know that we need our partners in commerce to work closely with us to structure grants as opposed to loans. And that's one of the biggest issues that we've been working on. So as I mentioned, our housing needs are different. We have a lot of benevolent large housing providers. I'll just call out Mercy Housing in particular. They've been really willing to work with us. When we first started talking to them, they're like, yeah, we want to be in the game. Where can we build 300, 400 units for people with developmental disabilities? And, unlike other models for, what do we call them, affinity grouping, senior families, families that around culturally rooted strategies for housing, for people with developmental disabilities, by the time you add in services, for 300 or 400 people in the same place, that feels like an institution, right? So we would rather our individuals blend in with family housing, other kinds of housing with other identities that they have that intersect with their disability, so that we're more included within the community. We desperately need community-based housing that is not just accessible, because 504 standards, not 504, ADA standards don't quite meet all of the requirements for someone with developmental disabilities. We need to make sure that we have these other pieces that we can customize around individuals with developmental disabilities. But we also have a lot of families, as I mentioned, raising their sons and daughters for many years. And the reality is, because we don't have sufficient day programs and childcare, usually one or more individuals in the household have to drop out of the workforce to care for their person with developmental disabilities. And they need access to low-income housing that's family-oriented, that allows them to keep their son or daughter with them for a long time. And so those homeownership programs and rental assistance programs are also super important for families that are still raising their children. And then we're working a little bit with DDA to adjust some of their waivers. In our world, they're called home and community-based waivers, to ensure that housing navigation and other mitigation measures can be included in what comes with those residential supports that people need. So we've been working hard with the legislature as well as Commerce and DDA to merge these worlds of developmental disabilities and housing. And it's hard because we speak different languages, right? And we have to spend some time learning each other's language so that we can blend these ideas and meet the needs of this population. We've been pretty excited. We have had good support in the legislature, and for the first time last session, we got $25 million. 1 minute? Okay. $25 million in the Housing Trust Fund set aside. Usually 2 or 3, 4 or 5 million are in there every biennium. We got some adult family homes that specialize in developmental disabilities. And we've got a lot of interest from Commerce to work together with us. I want to give a shout out really quick to House Bill 1628 that's going to come up again this legislative session. Some of you might have heard about the REIT tax. Whatever you think about taxes or the configuration of that bill, we're super excited about the DD portion there. So that has phenomenal language that we think solves the housing crisis for us. And we don't get to say that very often in the policy world. So I'm just making sure you know about that. And then the rest of my slide that you'll see is just the studies that I referenced that have loads of information about what we need and how it intersects with people with developmental disabilities. So thank you. Sorry.
Can I use this one? It's scary when I'm tech support. Let's just make it full screen. Almost. I'm gonna make it water. Okay. Thank you, Stacy. Is it coming out? Are you? Yeah, it's on. Can you guys hear? Okay, thank you. So I'm Sheng Fang. I'm the housing manager from DDA. So we are part of the Department of Social Service and Health Department. So we serve the people with developmental disabilities. And overall, we have about 50,000 enrolled clients we serve, and we get billions of budgets. And we have hundreds or thousands of case managers and service providers to provide the residential services or other necessary services for our clients. I'll use this one. Hello, it's better? Okay. So I'm Sheng Fang. I'm the housing manager at DDA, and we are part of the Department of Social and Health Service Department. And we have about 50,000 enrolled clients in our administration, and we get billions of budgets. And we have hundreds and thousands of case managers and service providers to provide the services our clients need to successfully live in the community. And guess how many staffs working for the housing part in DDA? Make a guess. 5? 2? Go wild. 1. I'm the one. So, yeah, I'm the one. And even before I was hired, there's no people working for the housing part. So we really realize there is a gap. So we get those wonderful case managers, we get dedicated service providers, we have on-site staff to provide services to our clients, and we want to help our clients to move out from the institutions. So far we still get several hundreds of clients that still live in the institutions. So we want to help them to be successful in the community. Well, one big question is, where should we move them to? So some of them live with their family members, so we get like about 35% of DD clients live with their families. But how about the other people? How about the aging parents? So we get anxious calls basically weekly. So what should we do? So when we are aging and no longer able to provide the care to our loved ones, so we got to find a solution. So that's how we get this housing business established within DDA. So we don't build house. So I want to make it clear. So we want to provide the housing supporting services to help our clients identify the housing needs, to help them find a place to live, to help them maintain their home. So that's a major goal for us. Okay. So Stacy just remind us there is an ongoing housing crisis for DD community. So basically, we get 170,000 clients, DD population in Washington State, and DDA has 50,000 enrolled clients. And based on the Eco Northwest report, we need 37,000 accessible and affordable housing units for the clients. Well, the reality is, during the past 30 plus years, so we collaborate with our wonderful partner, Commerce there, created about 1,400 units. So now the current number is about 1,500 units. Some of them are still building. So we see the gap is huge, and there is a possibility it may increase because we all noticed the housing price is going up, and the population is going up, and the rent is going up. So everything became more expensive, while our clients receive a really limited income. So most of them live on the SSI, so that's about $800, $900 per month. So we got to do something to help to address this situation. And we have a powerful friend, our commerce friend. They have a program called the Housing Trust Fund. And per our efforts with ARC, with DDC, with Commerce, we are able to, with the legislature, we are able to get a set-aside resource to support our DD community to get more affordable housing units. So it used to be $5 million every 2 years, and now last year we successfully launched 2 housing reports, and we are able to increase the amount to $25 million. Sounds like a huge number, but if we think about how many housing units we may be able to create through this $25 million, we can make another guess. More than 10, so thanks God. So it's about 100 to 200 units, depends on the location. So if we put all the money in Seattle area, we get less. So if we distribute it through the Washington state-wide, so we get more. And also we have clients live in different areas, different counties. So that's a major achievement. So we get 4 more times compared with the previous fund we received. But we would say, is that enough? Definitely not. No. So we're going to keep communicate with legislature, with other leadership, and also our friends here, everybody here. You can help us too. So let them understand what is the current ongoing housing crisis and what should we do. But definitely we need more resources to address this problem. And those are the two reports. We use it as a data and as our argument points to share it with legislature, with the leadership. So one is talking about the funding prioritize. So how should we direct those funds to different areas? How should we use those funds more effectively to create more accessible and affordable housing units? And the other one is a big one as collaboration between DDA and Eco Northwest. So we get a really strong data and the statistic method were used in that report. It's called the Housing Needs Report for the DD community, for the DD population in Washington state. So highly recommend. So if we get a chance, we can download it from DDA website and use the data mentioned in there. So a couple of major, always key suggestions we mentioned in those 2 reports. The first one is we say to increase the DD housing fund, and we are able to make good friends with our commerce people there. So our best friend Nate there. So we are successfully make it $25 million, and if possible, we would ask more. And also we say we want to create a separate review pool for our DD housing applications. So this conversation is something like this. So we say, okay, so we are bananas, so we want some treat for bananas. And then we get a respond, okay, Mr. Apple, what can we help you? And say, I'm banana. So every apple is created equal. And so that's a situation because our developers, Stacy introduced, we need scattered single-family house. And it's not the traditional housing developers. They are building 200 units, 300 units in the apartment. So when we compete together with those large developers, our DD developers is not in a very good position. No. So finally now we say we get responding from our Housing Trust Fund team. So, Mr. Banana, what can we help you? So, tears in my eyes. So that's I think that's a wonderful conversation and help people understand what our housing need. And of course, we're open. We're not just focused on single family house. We'll talk about that later. And also we say we would prefer more access to grants than the loan. So because loans usually put some pressure on the developer's balance sheet. And we all know our clients' income is, we consider, extremely low. So we say for the federal criteria, 30% of AMI considered extremely low income. Well, most of our clients receive only about 15% of AMI. So in our way to say that is, our clients, they cannot even afford the affordable housing because most of the affordable housing, let's set up the rental bar as 30% of the 30% of AMI. So that's a gap. That's a gap. We're trying to figure out solutions to help with that. And also, as we said, we want to reinforce our long-term strategy and also expanding our DD housing team. So we want to finish this one-man show. We want to create a 100-man show. And then another thing is we try to advocate if there is a one-stop shop thing, a website, get all of the affordable housing resources on that one website, and our case managers, our service providers, and our housing team, if we want the resource of the affordable housing, we can just go there. So this is under discussion. Okay, so we have two types of affordable housing. So the first one is the one we are focusing on. So we paired up with the legislature, with commerce, with housing developers, with service providers. So we actually get this fund, and this capital fund was used to create the affordable housing units. And once those units are created, they became like permanent, affordable. So we say 40 years-ish. So the building is always there. So we have clients move in, we have clients move out, and new clients move in. They don't need to use any housing voucher or something like that. So they just move in, and this unit is affordable for them. So that's a major type we're working on. And also we're open to the traditional housing subsidy type. So that's something like a federal housing subsidy, used to be called Section 8 vouchers, but they're extremely hard to get. So we know some cities like Seattle, the waiting list has been closed for years. And also we are exploring the possibility if we can get some state fund to create like a DD housing subsidy program just for DD clients. So those are the two major affordable housing formats we are looking into. And some previous data, so we get support from Housing Trust Fund, and we are able to create something like 65 DD units through, that's before this cycle. So this cycle we're doing much better job. So we're going to give a brief update for the 2023 one. And sometimes we are lucky, so we get extra resources through other funding source. So for example, last time we get some fund from the Dan Thompson account, and we are able to collaborate with Commerce, with DDC, with DDA. So we use that extra money to create some more affordable housing units for our people. But those kind of wonderful things not necessarily happening every year. So once we get a chance, we get it. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of our visions and our strategies. So our vision is, so currently we only have this 1,400-ish affordable units. In a perfect world, and in the future, we would like to see as DDA, together with our partners, we can provide housing solution for every client or for every DD population, people who has a housing need. So we say the housing solution, we mean both affordable, accessible housing units and the corresponding service the clients needed. So together, so we're not going to do this like we just hand out the key to the client and say, okay, there we go. So we pair the housing together with service, and we say housing itself is part of the health care the clients need to receive. And in order to do that, we need to do several things. We need to take actions. So the first one is we're going to still continually strengthen our connections with our community. So that's the weak part currently, to be honest, because we just have one man here. So we are looking into expanding our housing team, and we can do more things with a local resource. So we can have our people connected with local housing authorities, local agents, local funders, and local builders, because we know housing is very, very much localized situation. So we want to do that, and we want to expand our housing capacities, the accessible, affordable housing capacities. So we mentioned we are in a huge need of the scattered single-family units or duplex or triplex units. Well, in the meantime, we are open to other formats of accessible, affordable housing units. For example, we recently paired up with Mercy Housing. So Stacy mentioned they originally want to create 300 DD units in one building. We say, no, that's not okay because it's a direct violation with the CMS rule. So we need the units to be integrated in the community and not isolated. And they're smart people. So listen to us and say, okay, so what's your cap? So we say usually like 10 or 20% of the total units. So we are able to create like about 40 units through the Mercy Housing scattered in the apartment and not isolated. So work together with other people. So that's also a good format because our housing needs is diverse. So we have clients need 24/7 service, online stuff, on-site stuff. Sometimes one staff, one client, sometimes two staffs, one client. So for those group of people, we need scattered single family will work better. Well, we also have people, they can work like 4 hours per day or 10 hours per week. So they will be totally fine to live in an apartment setting. So just close to the transportation, close to where they work. So we are open. So any housing type can help us to increase the capacity will be great. We'll support it. And also we want to add more like housing supporting services into the waiver. That's a big goal. So we currently have five waivers services to help to provide services to our clients. At very limited housing supporting services was introduced in those waiver services. So if we can successfully use a federal waiver resources to provide the housing supporting services to our clients, that will be beautiful. And also we want to explore the subsidy part. 1 minute. Okay. 1 minute. Let's see what we can do. Okay. So that's the housing need. So Stacy mentioned that, and we want to try to keep it available, so affordable. So our key idea is, if possible, we send the rental cap at 30% of our clients' income. So in that way, they have resources to help themselves get a better life. Okay, so quickly go over some beautiful houses. So again, we didn't build those houses. We partnership with developers to create those houses. So this is a one single family house. and another one. So they're gorgeous and beautiful. And we have this totally accessible design. So we see those beautiful ramps, and we're going to add an extra rail in the future. So make 2 rails on both sides. And this is an example of how we design this bathroom. So totally wheelchair accessible. And look at those beautiful and strong grabbing bars on the wall. They are really helpful. Okay, so those are the housing report links and some founders information. And so we want more accessible, affordable housing developers for us. So please do me a favor. So if you know any developers who might be interested in helping a DD community, send their information to me or to my supervisor. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. We are turning up the volume on DD housing, right? How many of you were aware that we had a housing crisis in the state of Washington? How many of you are actively working in that space? How many of you are actively working with the DD community currently? That's great. Great to see. How many of you work for the state of Washington and maybe with the Department of Commerce, maybe with the Housing Trust Fund? All right. All right, so I'm Nate Lichti, and I guess I do need to move my presentation over here once I figure out how the screen works. We are really proud and pleased to partner with these fine folks on serving this population. We totally recognize that there is a statewide housing crisis that affects all communities, but the most vulnerable communities absolutely can get lost in those crises and in the emergency. And so we are very appreciative of the efforts of advocates and partners in helping us spotlight and focus our attention on these efforts. So I've got some, I think, some exciting things to share. We will have some overlap. Ha, got it. We're also the department that cares. We care about a lot of things. And so, as you see, we do, the Department of Commerce is the Swiss Army knife, or the junk drawer. We do a lot of things across a lot of different platforms. But of course, we are here to talk about the Housing Trust Fund, and I represent the multifamily housing unit, where we've invested over $2 billion in our 37 years of history, and produced over 58,000 units. They've spotlighted that about 1,400 of those are restricted and reserved for the IDD community, and that's far short of the need in a variety of populations, but the focus on this population is really essential. So we do have a priority preference of serving those persons with disabilities, with multiple special needs, with extremely low income. So we do, and we're serving over 90,000 people across the state of Washington. The Commerce also has a program that we assist with behavioral health facilities, and there is some confusion and overlap, and sometimes it's difficult for applicants that are looking at designing a project to figure out where they should apply, what they should pursue, and so and we're trying to parlay and figure out sometimes what a project is intended to do and who they're trying to serve and how they're trying to serve and which funding source to arrive at. So we kind of have, we recognize that facilities are managed by the Behavioral Health, the Community Facilities Fund, and so often those are properties that are licensed and that are serving the 24/7 hour staffing and are meeting a real focused healthcare need. We typically are investing most substantially in prioritizing permanent supportive housing, where we have tenants that have full rights, where the housing is leased, the incomes are restricted, and the rents are restricted, and that we have voluntary services. We recognize there are projects that kind of fit in the gray area, and we are doing. The Housing Trust Fund does fund, and we do support a lot of these project types. And if you ever are looking at designing a project and have questions about it, our team is very happy to consult with you, refer, and help brainstorm for you which fund you might want to pursue. So they have identified that there's been a set aside, and that set aside has been increasing, and we're really excited about that. We're also it's really critical that we highlight the partnership that we have with DDA. And so DDA is active in reviewing our applications. They are helping us to revise our NOFA, so our application form was amended and revised we had an IDD, specific addendum, this application round that was tailor-made and intended to help with the review and evaluation to make sure that the services are being designed and are appropriately available for the residents that we're trying to serve. And we are seeing that there are a variety of project types that we're trying to explore. And those types, we are often trying to ascertain whether or not the design is appropriate, and I've got some slides about the project that has been referenced. The last biennium, the thing that I wanted to highlight, not just the increasing amount of funds, but that partnership with the Dan Thompson account. The Dan Thompson account was legislative allocation of $50 million to this reserved account to serve this population. And in a very inclusive participatory process where a lot of individuals with lived experience were involved in the review, the residents said, we want about a third of the funding to go to housing. Housing was a critical fundamental need. It wasn't specified by the legislature, it was specified by the community. And so we worked through this partnership to do an intergovernmental transfer of funds to the Housing Trust Fund so that we could help administer the projects and allocate those resources and get the projects built. And it was really part of the exciting aspect of that was a lot of non-housing providers, a lot of new providers came into this application round that was very simplified, very streamlined from the traditional Housing Trust Fund application. And I got some smiles because I know some of you have applied and you know how awesome our applications are. They're very thorough, and they're thorough for a reason. But that was it's been really informative and instructional on how we can get new developers into the mix and how we can train and support organizations who may be new to housing to use our resources to build the housing and serve the community. And we're really excited about those opportunities. So we've mentioned Mercy and this project in particular. It is a $72 million project serving with 130, can I do the math? 130 units. It says it. I did the math though, 104 plus 26. 26 units for persons with IDD. The design, we're very intentional in working with ARC of designing and influencing the layout of the property and the units to make sure that this was going to serve the community effectively. So this is a very maybe this is a new prototype that we're going to be exploring and seeing. This is using tax credits. So the cost per unit from the state investment is a very high return on investment for this. But again, we know that this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all. We're not going to expect all IDD projects to be 130 units. And we have this partnership with Parkview, which Marc, I asked Marc if he's an apple or banana. He didn't answer yet, so ask him and find out which type of fruit he is. But this is an innovative stabilization project that the legislature really wanted to pilot. Advocates wanted to pilot, and so it is a licensed facility, which isn't typically in our portfolio. But we've worked with Marc and Parkview a lot, so we have been providing funding to this, and it's going to be a transitional facility that is going to be staffed by DDA, and it's going to provide that 24-hour support. So it's a really important part of the continuum that we're excited about. Through the Dan Thompson project allocation, Vadis is a new housing provider. Is anybody from Vadis in the room? I want to give a shout out if you are here. But Vadis is doing 10 houses, and it's going to be in King, Pierce, and Kitsap. So we're getting a regional involvement. This is the scattered site model. And so they've been actively developing, and a group of us went out to the ribbon cutting for the first property already last spring, I believe. And then Arc of the Peninsulas is doing a project in Bremerton. This is another one that's a multifamily project, $8.3 million in costs, and a little under half of the units are going to be reserved for persons with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities. So through the Dan Thompson project, we were seeing some innovation, and we were going to be very interested in evaluating the performance and the functioning of all of these types. And I think this is going to be a really great opportunity for us to learn as a community and as an agency. In the future, we do recognize that there have been challenges with occupancy at older properties. The needs of the IDD community have changed, and so we have lost some units through attrition or through some factors related to the intensity of the needs of the population. So we have had to do some revisions and work with developers on modifying their agreements. And we're really wanting to maintain and make sure that we are dealing with reasonable accommodations, making sure that properties are getting modifications. So our preservation fund has been utilized to make some updates to properties. We have maintained high building and design standards, and this is an area where we've had many discussions with DDA about what are those special amenities that may be needed to accommodate the population and serve them well over the course of 40 or 50 years. We're also making efforts to simplify and streamline the application. There is a combined funders application, and so one of the things that we've been bantering about is we created an IDD addendum this round, which was streamlined and really targeted and focused. But if people are going to be applying for multiple funding sources, there's benefit of filling out the combined funders application so that other public entities can submit funding. What we recognize is there might not be local public funders. And so if they are going to just come to the state for full subsidy, then we need to think through that. But we're also wanting to provide support through our capacity building and outreach program so that we can provide that TA, that technical assistance, up front and give people pre-development support so that they can navigate and do the application. There is a method to the madness of the application round and the importance of doing the due diligence on a property, not just for us as a state, but for organizations that are doing the housing and committing to 40 or 50 years. We want to make sure that those best practices of owning and developing affordable housing are followed, and that is, again, part of that application process. And we recognize that the long-term operations and the new innovations of different types of models through the stabilization facilities and partnership with our with the Building Communities and the Behavioral Health Facilities Fund, as they expand their program, how do we complement and support one another in the overall service of this population? So I think that's the last slideshow you'll see. I think Marc's going to come up and take us home. I don't have my slide. I don't have my, but I got friends back here that could help if I needed to phone a friend. But $25 million in funding was allocated this round, And through the simplified application and through the competitive application, we shared earlier this week the results of the application. And high level, people have seen 97 applications requesting $437 million. For this set aside, the $25 million set aside, we had 20 applications asking for over $40 million. So for the first time in many years, the funding is actually oversubscribed. It's going to be competitive. And with that $40 million, Lisa, how many units were being proposed? 228. So there is, developers are stepping forward to target and serve this population, partnering with DDA to make sure that this partnership, the referral processes are in place, and they're coming forward to design projects to serve this population. So very proud of that, and I'm sorry I kept that.
Oh, that's fine.
Thanks, Nate. My name's Marc Cody. I'm the Executive Director of Parkview Services. Parkview Services is a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded in 1967 with the first community-based housing for children with IDDs in the state of Washington. We have several programs, but two are related to housing. One is the homeownership program, which is statewide, where we provide down payment assistance to first-time home buyers with a family member or a household member that's a person with IDDs. We also have, whoops. Oh, I can't do it. Go to view full screen. Oops. Okay. And then we have a rental program where we develop, own and manage homes, mostly single-family homes. We have 68 properties in King, Snohomish, and Pierce counties. There's 56 single-family homes and 12 condos. So one of the things that you've heard, there's a large need for housing for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And our model for developing is the scattered site model, and the reason that it works for a large subset of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that require 24/7 support services. There's no common walls. There's parking for staff. Typically, a household of 3 that requires 24/7 support services has up to 10 or more staff that work in shifts, and there can be up to 4 staff per shift. And so parking can be a challenge in some of the larger tax credit projects. They're located in a neighborhood. There's options for fencing to mitigate any elopement issues that might exist. And another thing is that it doesn't cost burden the tenants. Where in a larger tax credit project, if they set the rents at 30% of 30% of the area median income, and as you heard, Stacy is, the folks with IDDs are typically earning 12% of the area median income. And so the properties, so as was said before, there's a scarcity of developers, and one of the reasons for it is, these projects, scattered site projects, typically can't leverage tax credits. And the large for-profit developers don't want to develop for 30% AMI because the properties don't cash flow unless there's subsidy, significant subsidy. I think for a single-family home at Parkview, if it's 3 bedrooms, if we don't have subsidy, we lose $8,000 a year. So another thing is in trying to get developers in this space. We have lots of small nonprofits, some of them that are the service providers themselves, and they would consider developing in this space, but they are intimidated by the application process. And as you heard Nate say, that Commerce has been responsive to our advocacy to try to increase the number of people that are developing this type of housing. Yeah. And I'll say a couple things. One is in 2021, only 11 of the 1,281 low-income units that were awarded were for people with IDDs. That's less than 1%. And in 2022, 39 of 1,188 units were awarded to IDDs. And there were some tax credit projects, but a lot were for the scattered site projects. So again, that shows how the partnership with Commerce and DDA has improved in this space. That's all I have.
I'll use this one, thank you. So I don't have any questions on the app. Do we have a question in back? Okay. I guess I'll walk back if you're okay with that. Yeah.
Yes, I'm with the State Housing Trust Fund, and I have just a two-part question. Number one, if someone could provide a distinction in definition between persons with developmental disabilities versus intellectual disabilities. And then part two, having some background in asset management. I know in the past we've had some issues with contractors where when the projects were originally developed, they were scattered site projects, single family homes, I think operating more like group homes. And, you know, for example, with on average 3 bedrooms per house, and it was envisioned that all 3 bedrooms would be occupied by 3 persons with developmental disabilities. But in reality, over the long term, it ends up being a potential compliance issue because that just isn't realistic. You can have, as I understand it, compatibility issues with occupants, and it's more realistic that you might have a caregiver living in one of those 3 bedrooms. So, long story short, my question is this. When you're getting into the planning phases for design of these projects, and I'm assuming you've got a broad spectrum of clients and the developmental disability population with a broad spectrum of needs. And so how much discussion, and on top of that you have referrals coming from DSHS. So how much involvement, how early in the process now is the referral system kicking in? Is it happening in the design phase? Because I'm assuming that you're going to have clients that are going long term. So I'm wondering if maybe like someone building a house, a custom made house for themselves, if that would work in this field. So, thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I will take the first one, the easy one. So so we may heard about different terms between like IDD and a DD. So the difference is that intellectual disability is one type of developmental disability. So we used to use DD, and then we shift to IDD, and now we have a new law in Washington State. We can no longer use IQ test as a criteria to determine the eligibility of the clients for DDA services. So now we switch back to developmental disability. So this is like a part of the disability, And a large group of disabilities are different. So intellectual disability belongs to developmental disability. And we have other disabilities also help make the clients qualify for DDA service. So did that answer your question? The difference between intellectual and the DD.
So I can talk a little bit about the vacancy issue or so oftentimes, well, in group homes, it's group living where they have support services, that it is harder to fill the vacancies because the person has to fit in the household. So it takes some time. There is some benefit for that DDA provides. They'll pay a vacancy rent. So if it's vacant, the service provider gets a subsidy from DDA, and so it doesn't negatively impact the financial position of the project. But there's also sometimes a family member. I'm sorry, not a family member. It's like something happens and that somebody can't live with. For some reason, they might have experienced some trauma, or they might need a live-in caregiver. And so what we tend to do is we get permission from the funders to have an accommodation for that. And it's not, permanent. It'll go back to a 3-bedroom house, once the house becomes vacant.
I was just going to add a little bit more to people with developmental disabilities, that come with services that we've talked about. Really got to have that gold star certification. And the door into DDA services, I'll just be polite and say there's some bouncers there, right? Like all social services, it's hard. This is why we have such under-identification of people with developmental disabilities in our state, because the criteria is very convoluted and complex, and the application process at DDA is kind of comparable to the current housing application in some ways. It's hard, and it costs money, and it takes time. And this is odd because these are adults generally who have, again, had their diagnosis since they were 2 or 3 years old. It shouldn't be this hard, so we're working on that as well. We know there are a lot of people with developmental disabilities who are not in DDA who still need this kind of supportive kind of housing, and we are also, as advocates, working hard to ensure that people with developmental disabilities who are not in DDA or not getting services for whatever reason can also access these kinds of units that are going to be more amenable. I also want to remind folks that people with developmental disabilities are human beings. They are living out in the community, and they fall in love, and they get married, and they have relationships, and people move in with them. And heaven forbid we have a government subsidized project where someone without a developmental disability or might not be in the system is living with someone with a developmental disability. It shouldn't be that hard to accommodate, which is why we need all these different kinds of models. Again, we need, sometimes they're licensed facilities, that's much more complicated. Mostly we need housing that is flexible to meet the needs of people with developmental disabilities, so they live in the community like we all do. They can paint their room purple, they can get a cat, they don't have to abide by other people's rules. They can go to Taco Bell at 2 in the morning if they want with their staff. They can live with someone, their family member can live with them. We're not talking about institutional housing here. And so I know you've heard a lot about models and regulations and all those kinds of things. As an advocate and a family member, I just want to encourage our system to, again, just listen carefully to the situations that people with developmental disabilities are in and the goals we have as a society to integrate them and have them belong.
Right.
I want to add one more thing regarding to the housing designing part. So currently we would say we, DDA, help the housing developers to get connected with service providers at the very beginning of the application. So in that way, the housing developers know exactly what the housing need of our clients will be like. And so we think this is a really, really helpful strategy to help pre-designed person-centered house for our clients. And again, so we need all your support, not just 4 of us. This is not something we can do it alone, or we can do it for 4 people. We need much more people to speak for our community to help the legislature, the leadership understand what do we need in here. Thank you.
All right, thank you to our presenters. Thank you very much. You guys go enjoy lunch. If you have more questions, they'll just be right up front for a few minutes.